In 1914, Ernest Shackleton prepared to attempt something no explorer had ever achieved, crossing Antarctica from one side to the other. "27 men volunteered for an expedition unlike anything the world had ever attempted. Their ship was called Endurance." For weeks, the voyage unfolded exactly as Shackleton had hoped. The Southern Ocean welcomed them forward. Then the Antarctic revealed its true nature. The ice ahead wasn't simply floating, it was closing. Each mile south brought thicker ice. Shackleton knew they were entering one of the most dangerous seas on Earth. Captain Frank Worsley searched constantly for open water, but the Antarctic offered fewer choices with every passing hour. Then it happened. The sea froze around Endurance, and the ship would not move again. For weeks, the men waited. They believed the shifting ice would eventually release the ship, but Antarctica had no intention of letting them go. As winter closed in, the truth became impossible to ignore. Endurance was no longer sailing through Antarctica. Antarctica had claimed the ship. Then the sun disappeared. For months, darkness became their new world, and Endurance became more than the ship's name. Shackleton understood that survival depended on more than food. If hope disappeared, the expedition would disappear with it. Each day followed a routine. Exercise, work, and shared purpose became their strongest defense against fear. Then the ice came alive. What had once seemed motionless now became an unstoppable force, squeezing Endurance with unimaginable pressure. The first violent crack changed everything. In that moment, Shackleton knew they were no longer fighting to complete an expedition. They were fighting to stay alive. Every hour, the ice squeezed harder. The pressure was greater than any ship could withstand. Then the sea found its way inside. Freezing water poured through the shattered hull, turning hope into desperation. Hour after hour, they pumped freezing water from the ship. Every man fought with everything he had, but the Antarctic kept winning. Shackleton finally accepted the truth. The expedition had failed, but his responsibility had only just begun. From this moment forward, every decision would be about bringing his men home alive. Then came the order no explorer ever wanted to give: abandon ship. From that moment on, their mission was no longer to conquer Antarctica. It was simply to survive. Every crate, every tool, and every ounce of food could mean the difference between life and death. Nothing essential would be left behind. The ship that had carried them south could no longer protect them. Their future now rested inside 3 small lifeboats. With no land beneath their feet, the men built a new home on drifting sea ice. They called it Ocean Camp. Shackleton made a difficult choice. Every unnecessary pound was left behind. Only the tools that could save lives would continue the journey. They stood together in silence. Endurance had carried them farther south than almost anyone before, but now they would leave her behind and face Antarctica alone. With Endurance gone, 28 men climbed into 3 small lifeboats and sailed into the unknown. Every wave threatened to swallow them before they could ever reach land. Against all odds, the survivors reached Elephant Island, but their journey was far from over. Elephant Island offered solid ground, but no hope of rescue. Shackleton made a bold decision. 6 men would sail more than 800 miles across the world's most dangerous ocean. Every piece of food, every rope, every decision could determine whether anyone survived. 6 men sailed into one of the most dangerous oceans on Earth, leaving 22 others behind. For 16 terrifying days, the Southern Ocean tested every ounce of their strength. After 16 unimaginable days, land finally appeared through the storm. They had survived the ocean, but one final obstacle still stood between them and rescue. Between them and rescue stood mountains no one had ever crossed. Without maps, without ropes, they climbed into a wilderness no human had ever crossed. Then through the clouds they saw smoke. Civilization was finally within reach. When Shackleton finally reached Stromness, the workers could hardly believe the men standing before them were alive. There was no time to celebrate. 22 men were still waiting on Elephant Island, and Shackleton was determined to bring every one of them home. Safe at last, Shackleton refused to rest. 22 men were still trapped on Elephant Island, and he was determined to bring every one of them home. Within days, the first rescue attempt was underway. Day by day, southern sky fought its way south. But ahead lay the greatest obstacle of all, the vast frozen barrier that had already claimed the Endurance. Antarctica refused to surrender its prisoners. An unbroken wall of sea ice stopped the expedition cold. Shackleton had no choice but to turn back, but he made one silent promise to himself. He would return, no matter how many attempts it took. The first rescue attempt had failed, but Shackleton refused to believe that Elephant Island would become his men's final resting place. There was no celebration. Shackleton had only one mission left: finding another ship before Antarctica sealed the fate of his men forever. Without hesitation, Shackleton launched another rescue mission. Every passing day meant harsher ice and less time for the men waiting on Elephant Island.
All hands, prepare to depart!
With a new vessel beneath his feet, Shackleton sailed south once again. Hope returned, but Antarctica had not yet finished testing his resolve. For the second time, Antarctica closed its frozen gates. Every mile south became a battle against an ocean turning into solid ice. For the second time, the frozen sea defeated the rescue mission. Yet Shackleton refused to accept failure. As long as his men were alive on Elephant Island, he would keep coming back. Twice the frozen sea had turned him back, but Shackleton refused to surrender. With a smaller vessel named Emma, he prepared for yet another desperate attempt to reach Elephant Island. Once again, Shackleton sailed into the world's most unforgiving ocean. Winter had grown even harsher, but turning back without trying was never an option. For the third time, Antarctica denied Shackleton passage.
Turn back.
Another ship was forced to retreat, but Shackleton still refused to abandon the 22 men waiting beyond the ice. 3 rescue attempts had failed. With winter closing in, Shackleton turned to the Chilean government for one final chance. Everything now depended on a single decision. The Chilean government approved one final rescue mission. Captain Luis Pardo placed the naval tug Yelcho at Shackleton's disposal, and preparations began immediately. Failure was no longer an option. Before dawn, Yelcho slipped quietly out of Punta Arenas. Shackleton knew this would be his final chance. If this mission failed, the men on Elephant Island might never be seen again. The Drake passion unleashed its worst. Still, Yelcho pressed forward. Shackleton knew 22 men were waiting for one final miracle. Then, at last, the impossible began to change. The sea ice slowly opened, revealing a narrow passage toward Elephant Island. For the first time in months, hope was stronger than fear. At last, Elephant Island appeared through the mist. But one question remained. Had the 22 men survived the long Antarctic winter? Then a single figure appeared on the shore. Moments later, more men emerged from beneath their makeshift shelters. Against every expectation, every one of Shackleton's 22 companions was still alive. Shackleton's first question was simple. "Are you all well?" Frank Wild answered with the words every leader longs to hear. Every man was alive. Against impossible odds, not a single soul had been lost on Elephant Island. One by one, the survivors stepped aboard Yelcho. Behind them, Point Wild faded into history, the lonely refuge that had protected them through the darkest months of their lives. As Yelcho turned toward home, Shackleton watched Elephant Island disappear into the mist. Behind him stood every one of his men, alive. It was a moment few believed possible. For the first time in nearly 2 years, the entire expedition was together again. Warm food, dry clothes, and safety replaced hunger, cold, and uncertainty.
Thank you, sir.
Shackleton had fulfilled the promise he made from the very beginning, to bring every man home. The Endurance had been lost beneath the Antarctic ice. But thanks to Shackleton's extraordinary leadership, every one of his 28 men survived. It remains one of the greatest rescue stories ever told. Against impossible odds, Shackleton fulfilled the promise he had made from the very beginning. He lost his ship, but he never lost a single man. His leadership would become one of the greatest examples of courage and resilience in human history. What began as a journey to cross Antarctica became something far greater. The Endurance expedition was no longer remembered for the ship that was lost, but for the lives that were saved. Shackleton's greatest achievement was never reaching Antarctica's far side. It was leading every one of his men safely home. More than a century later, his leadership continues to inspire explorers, soldiers, and leaders around the world. History remembers the Endurance expedition for one remarkable reason. When everything seemed lost, courage, leadership, and hope carried every man safely home. Some leaders are remembered for the places they reached. Ernest Shackleton is remembered for the people he refused to leave behind. Shackleton never completed his planned crossing of Antarctica, yet he achieved something far greater. He proved that the greatest victories are measured not by miles traveled, but by every life brought safely home. More than a century later, Shackleton's decisions are still studied by explorers, rescue teams, military leaders, and organizations around the world. His greatest expedition became a masterclass in leadership. Antarctica remains as vast and unforgiving today as it was in 1916. The ice remembers nothing, but the courage shown here will never be forgotten. These were not legends, they were real men who faced impossible conditions. Their courage, sacrifice, and determination transformed an expedition into one of history's greatest survival stories. History remembers Shackleton not through monuments alone, but through the example he left behind. His journals recorded an expedition, his actions defined a legacy that still inspires the world. The ice remained, the mountains remained, Antarctica endured, just as it always had. But because of one leader's unwavering resolve, 28 lives returned home and the world gained a timeless lesson in courage.
Perhaps Shackleton's greatest lesson was also his simplest, that every impossible challenge begins to fade when courage refuses to surrender.
From hope to hardship to the greatest rescue of them all, the Endurance expedition proved one timeless truth: no one was left behind. Together, these 28 men faced the impossible. Together, they came home. Their courage, their brotherhood, and their legacy will never be forgotten. May the story of the Endurance expedition continue to remind future generations that courage, compassion, and leadership can overcome even the impossible. Thank you for watching. The Endurance expedition reminds us that true courage, true leadership, and true hope can change history forever.